Hello, everybody. Once again, I have the pleasure speaking to one of the most insightful analysts on global matters. Welcome to the channel, Ben Hodges.
Thank you very much, Christoph.
By the way, let me also quickly introduce myself. My name is Christoph Müller. I make videos for Ukraine here on YouTube in German and in English language. Please don't forget to hit the subscribe and like button to support my work on this channel and make more interviews possible. But now to our first question. I want to focus on the lack of support by the West. Why, for example, Chancellor Merz is still not delivering Taurus? Is he afraid? What's your take on that, Ben?
Well, of course, I wish that Germany would provide that capability to the Ukrainians, because Ukraine has, I think, discovered or come to the realization that their path to victory goes through the destruction of Russia's oil and gas industry, their ability to export oil and gas to China and India and other customers. So having a long-range precision strike capability is a critical part of that. So things like Taurus, but also, Tomahawk or Storm Shadow, any of these systems would be helpful on helping Ukraine defeat Russia, or certainly changing the calculus there for the Kremlin. I think I can't explain exactly why the Bundeskanzler still is holding back, although I imagine it has something to do with this very challenging coalition he leads, and there are people still on the other part of his coalition that do not support helping Ukraine. So I imagine that's part of it. And frankly, the fact that the United States has pretty much abandoned Ukraine, except for what it might sell to European allies to then give to Ukraine. So I can understand some hesitation. I wish, though, that would change.
Yeah, I wish too. In our last interview, you said, Europe, save us from ourselves. You meant the USA. We should not forget Ukraine. How can it happen that Ukraine and Europe will get closer together and become a fortress against these evil forces?
So I think it's important for our leaders to talk to us as if we are adults, to lay out what the risks are, what our interests are, to explain the challenges and what the costs are to protect us from those risks. Russia is clearly at war with Europe now. They're not launching missiles against Bremerhaven, or they're against somewhere in the Ruhrgebiet, but they are conducting sabotage. Last year in 2025, over 320 attacks on critical infrastructure in Germany. Not every one of those was sponsored by Russians, but we know that many of them are. Using criminals or proxies to do this. The drones that fly over German airports, not only are these a nuisance, they also cost billions of euro because of the shutdown of airports and air traffic. So these are all examples of what Russia is doing that challenge German sovereignty, disrupt German life, and they're intended to cause fear so that governments would stop supporting Ukraine. So that's what's going on. And our leaders need to explain this and then figure out ways to impose consequences on the Russians for what they are doing.
Yes, but when we are talking about the war, then usually we are on the kinetic measures, but we could also talk about another aspect of the hybrid warfare, which is the information warfare and the political destabilization of democratic countries. And I also have, unfortunately, to mention the Americans, which are flipped now. How can we prevent this from happening, that the rest of us democratic countries in Europe is also flipped now? What's your take on that?
So in America, 77 million people voted for President Trump, for Donald Trump, the second time, after seeing him in action one time already, and then all the things that happened in the 4 years in between, and then 77 million people voted for him. That tells you that there are a lot of people that were unhappy with the direction, that felt left behind, thought that America's priorities were wrong. And there's also, frankly, a lot of people that just like to see old systems shaken up. I mean, they like that style of the president, and so he was reelected. And I think that the same things happen in other democratic countries
Mm.
in Europe potentially. And so the burden is on the leadership to help to regain the trust and confidence of their own populations to deliver good governance, and things that people want. They want security, they want reliable infrastructure, they want access to food and water and energy at affordable prices. They would like to know that they can have good neighbors and secure borders. These are all normal things, and governments have to deliver that. Otherwise, you end up with somebody that can appeal to the worst instincts or more extreme aspects of this without regard for the cost. So I'm not, obviously, I'm not qualified to stick my nose into domestic politics of Germany or be inappropriate, but I do understand why there's some frustration. I'm in a taxi uh, 5 or 6 times a week here, and I get very interesting insights from
Okay.
taxi drivers.
Okay. 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 Well, and the taxi drivers, they recognize you, they know you and know who you are.
Yeah, well, there's several that we rely on a lot, and so I've known these guys for years, and
I see. I see.
but you know what? Whenever I'm in the UK, taxi drivers are the absolute best source of what the hell's going on, and same thing in Berlin
Yeah.
or other cities.
So you're a person like many other persons too who have really good thoughts. What about the politicians who make the decisions? Don't they rely on people like you and ask for advice? And do they follow the advice later on? Think Donald Trump doesn't follow your advice. But what about Friedrich Merz?
Well, of course, I take advantage of every opportunity, such as at the Munich Security Conference, where there's a platform, an opportunity to speak to groups or to speak to media, professional influencers like you, to remind what I think is important, the responsibility of governments to protect their population, the value of belonging to NATO and how important NATO is for not just Europeans, but also for the United States and Canada. That despite the challenges, it is still the most successful alliance in the history of the world. So, yes, I do emphasize that. And then I also, because I'm not an entertainer, I try to help educate or explain. Maybe that's a better way to say it, to explain what's required for security and defense, and how can the Bundeswehr, the U.S. Army, the Polish Army, the British Army, what can they do to be as effective as possible? And then also, I do want to help develop or support a growing sense of urgency to do these things that are necessary. That's why I say that Russia is at war with us, even if we don't think so or we don't want it to be, because they are conducting gray zone operations that are damaging and dangerous for all of us. Um, we've got to increase not just defense spending, but focusing on those capabilities that we need, and focusing on the Einsatzbereitschaft of the German military. Are
Yeah.
they ready to fight? That means training, repair parts, ammunition, fuel. It's not just about new equipment. Um, Germany has absolutely the potential to make almost everything it needs. And I think increasingly, German industry will find ways either alone or with other nations to produce those things that right now it has to purchase from the United States. Now, as an American, I love it when any of our allies decide to purchase American produced equipment because it is so good. But Europeans have choices to make. And, I thought the Bundeskanzler gave a very good speech at Munich when, for the first time, I heard a German Bundeskanzler talking in a way that was eye level, Augenhöhe, with an American president about when he said, you do what you have to do, we do what we have to do. You still need us, we still need you.
Yeah. So that's true. The speech of Chancellor Merz was good. The actions are still missing from my point of view. He still has not delivered towers, and it seems to he wants.
I agree with you on that. I agree with you. I'm waiting for the actions to follow the words.
Absolutely. I'm disappointed because he promised towers and he still hasn't delivered it. I think of Olaf Scholz. Let's just focus briefly on the Baltic states of our Lithuanian brigade we have as Germany. Do you see a danger that Russia could start a second front? Do you see any danger of that in the near future?
I was just in Lithuania last week, and there is a lot of pride and excitement in Lithuania about the German brigade. I mean, they see this as such an important part of security for that part of NATO's eastern flank. So great confidence by the Lithuanians in what the German Bundeswehr is doing there. Now, I can imagine that this brigade is going to become the tip of the spear for the Bundeswehr. It will become the place where more German soldiers and officers want to serve because you're in a kind of an operational environment. You'll be training more. You'll a chance to really, really work on your professional skills. And I could imagine that it becomes the place where you have to pass through there. You have to go there and serve there, get that experience working with allies full time. And the idea of having families there also very important, just like when the United States made the decision to put American soldiers in Aschaffenburg and Baumholder and Ansbach and Grafenwehr and Vilsack and all these places with their families. That was a sign of the commitment of the United States that we're putting our kids and families there along with the soldiers to show that we are committed to the security. And so I think Germany doing that is equally powerful. And I think over time, I know it's not extremely popular right now, but over time, this will grow into a very good opportunity. Now, the Russians, I think the chance of them attacking somewhere else along in NATO to open a second front as you describe it, of course, I would never say that's not possible. It seems unlikely at this point because they really are stretched. So you ask, well, why would they attack Lithuania or Daugavpils there in Latvia, for example, or up in Estonia? Why would they do that? And of course, the purpose of it would be to break NATO, to prove that countries would not respond in an Article 5 situation, that if there was an armed attack on one of our Baltic allies, and they asked for Article 5, the other countries might say, I don't think so. That would be for the Russians the breaking of NATO, which is of course what they wanted for 80 years, 75 years. So it's possible. I don't think likely, but the way to make it stay unlikely is by having well-trained, well-equipped troops that are there with capabilities and plenty of ammunition, making it clear to the Russians that you do not want to make this terrible mistake.
Yeah, you say well-trained soldiers, but also to make clear that the political will is there, that they will, on the smallest attack of the Russians, whatever it could be, that they would react on it. Yeah, and that we have proved in the last years that we are never willing to react, and this is the thing which frightens me a little bit.
Well, you make a great point. Deterrence is not just about having Leopards and the attack helicopters and lots of troops there. It's also about will. So credible capability and demonstrated will to use that capability. So this is why these gray zone operations are so dangerous, because the Russians are constantly probing, doing things, damaging things, and if they see no real reaction, that if we treat everything as if it's a crime scene and you have to have perfect evidence before you attribute it to the Russians, this is never going to stop. And so I think one of the ways that Germany and other countries could demonstrate will is by inflicting consequences on the Russians for these gray zone operations. Even if you're not 100% certain, you could be 90% certain that Russia was behind it. Make them prove that they're not. Seize the Shadow Fleet vessels that are carrying Russian oil. Stop them. And you can, I guarantee you, 90% of them will have some kind of environmental problem, not properly insured, not properly registered, or some safety problem. And that's how you start inflicting consequences on the Russians, is by stopping those Shadow Fleet vessels.
For example, yes, and also drone operations or information warfare or funding pro-Russian politicians in Germany or in Europe. Those are all measures of the hybrid warfare, and I am missing in our discussion, in our overall discussion in Germany, and as far as I look in the other countries as I can, I guess the discussion is still not focusing enough on completely preventing the Russians from doing all those things. Why can't pro-Russian politicians from the AfD and Sarah Wagenknecht sit in talk shows and spread their lies? This is for me personally ridiculous, but it's under the umbrella of freedom of press, freedom of speech. Do you have any suggestions how to stop that?
So, what a great question. Yes, freedom of speech is an important part of any democracy.
Of course.
But also having a very tough professional media is also a part of a democracy that pushes back, that on talk shows, they don't let her. I've been on with Ms. Wagenknecht when she was doing that, and it was like a waterfall of absolute false statements coming out.
Das war auch schon im Kalten Krieg immer das Problem. Ich meine, es gab damals Planspiele, Atomwaffeneinsatz über Deutschland. Da hat sowohl Helmut Schmidt als auch Helmut Kohl haben sich darüber aufgeregt, wie die Amerikaner völlig rücksichtslos eigentlich in ihrem damaligen taktischen Spiel eine Kauf.
Wow.
And so this is, journalists have to push back and question, challenge that. Wait a minute, where does this go? What do you base this on? They can't be allowed to get away with it. And that's true for every politician or every public figure. You have to be able to back it up. Otherwise, you're just a mouthpiece. So that's a part of this. But you've touched on a very important thing here, Christoph, as you always do in your podcast. What's finally becoming more and more part of how people think about things is what we call the total defense concept. So defense is not just provided by the Bundeswehr or the armed forces of whichever country, but it's a whole of society. That includes having infrastructure that is protected, both your cyber infrastructure, your communications and banking infrastructure, as well as the hard, rail, ports, seaports, airports, bridges, etc. Having a secure infrastructure. That means that's done by people wearing civilian clothes, not in uniform, but the technicians, the labor force, and authorities responsible for these things. It also means enforcing the law against things such as these Shadow Fleet vessels. Germany could do a lot more enforcing the law to stop them. And then finally, it's in the information domain. You have to recognize that the information domain is competitive space, just like in the air domain or the maritime domain. You have to compete. And if you don't compete, this is why I always accept your invitation to come on your program. For me, this is competing in the information space, because your listeners are hearing all kinds of things from different directions. And so I want to compete. I want to help offer a perspective. And you can't just sit in the bleachers like watching a football match and expect everything to be sorted out. People have to compete.
To compete, that's very interesting what you say, because how to get, my viewers, people who watch this program, they already understand it. But getting to those people who still don't understand it, this is really difficult. I have a cousin, she is living in the former GDR, East Germany, and she grew up under Honecker and Ulbricht and so on. And she is completely, she's going to elect AfD up for sure, because she is completely convinced. And she says the old parties like the CDU, SPD, and so they all failed. And that's why now let's give the new ones, the AfD, a chance. They can prove it to give a chance. But as I made in this one caricature I do caricatures. We will injure ourselves completely, and this cannot be repaired. So let's hope that we can get through to these people too. With our message, and discussion is the only thing, of course. I see the watch and the time is out, unfortunately, because it's always such a big pleasure talking to you, Ben.
Well, thank you very much. I always enjoy it. And who knows, maybe I'll show up in your neighborhood one day and we could do it in person.
Oh, I would love that. All the best to you, Ben, and take care.
Thank you very much.